Hello, and welcome to HC199 Honors Writing. This is weird. My name is Eric Hill, and I will be guiding you through the process this term online. And I'm making this video as a backup. I don't trust Zoom just yet because it's thrown me off a few times. So this will be my backup in the event that we're not able to actually meet live. This is not my preferred pedagogy. I like the live dialogic model rather than the lecture information dump, but gotta have a backup and got to adapt. So welcome again to Honors Writing in my windowless basement. What I want to do in this video is just give you a quick overview of some of the things that we'll be covering. It's not going to be all-inclusive, but it will give you an idea of where we're headed and what kinds of tools we're using and things like that. The name of the course is Honors Writing, but in fact, that's about a third of what we're going to do. My specialty is in a field called epistemology, which is how we look at knowledge, how we parse knowledge, research in such a way that we can determine what's an opinion and what is a substantiated belief in some kind of information. That sounds kind of fancy, and all it really means is how to research. So one of the things that I'm very big on is understanding the difference between scholarly research and non-scholarly research. And there's a lot of room to move around in there. So the first thing I want to talk about is communication in different levels. A lot of you are in different fields, whether it's a STEM field or liberal arts or history or whatever. And you're all going to be accessing information, analyzing that information, and producing information. So you're going to be producing a signal or analyzing a signal. And what I want to talk about first is what can get in the way of that signal, and I call it signal to noise ratio. So if you're writing, for example, the emphasis in this course will be writing. You'll be producing 3 essays, a rhetorical analysis, an argument essay, and something called a Rogerian argument. Before you get to writing those, though, you'll be doing research on a topic and critically analyzing texts, documents, videos, this type of thing, looking at memos, letters, scholarly articles, things like that. What your job is to do initially is to judge how effective the document is in establishing its purpose for its target demographic or audience through the techniques that it's using. So let me go by that again. That's the breakdown of rhetorical analysis. Purpose, in other words, what is it? What is the signal? What is the document trying to do? Is it trying to convince you of something? Is it trying to instruct you on how to do something? Or is it just information that you don't need to do anything with necessarily or be convinced of? It's just information, FYI. The audience becomes incredibly important because the demographic profile of your primary audience is going to tell you how to go about doing that. So the more you know about your audience, needs, wants, biases, cultural background, gender, anyway, yeah. So there's a lot of things that you could know about your audience that will in turn help you figure out how to put the document together. So in other words, if you have an audience that is not an expert in the field and you're trying to teach them something or give them information, you probably don't want to engage in a lot of jargon. And what can get in the way and what can create noise are things like, well, if some of you struggle with punctuation or grammar problems, that can get in the way of the signal. You can, for example, if you're learning another language, I teach a colloquium called translations, where we look at languages and dialects and even expressions within the same language. In English, we have all kinds of pitfalls, even for native speakers, that can get in the way. And we'll talk about that. Other things that can create noise are, well, ignorance of context, bias, something called confirmation bias, which I'll be talking about. And anyway, we'll talk about all those tools, including some rhetorical tools that we use, and by the way, I keep using the word rhetorical. I should probably explain what that is. A rhetorical analysis takes apart a document. Doesn't necessarily have to be writing, but it can be writing, it can be a video like this one, it can be an image. A lot of times you'll see instructive documents using primarily images to get over the language problem, but sometimes that fails, such as in laundry instructions, and we'll talk about that later. How effective is the document in fulfilling its purpose for the audience through the technique? Again, what is it? Whom is it for? How is it put together? And that's what a rhetorical analysis is. Sometimes what gets in the way are fallacies, logical fallacies. If someone's trying to convince you of something, but you start to smell something isn't quite right, we're going to be looking at all the different kinds of fallacies people can engage in and we'll try to avoid them. That's a quick overview. There are a lot of details like tools for analysis. Some of you may be familiar with the Aristotelian appeals, which we'll be looking at, and that becomes very useful in doing rhetorical analysis, and we'll go over those as well. And context of time and place, very important, and I'll talk about those. I put together, and I'm gonna see if I can make this work. Let's see if I can make this work. Oh, too much technology. Ah, there it is. Will it share? Will it show up? Oh, I'm so excited. Hopefully you can see that. I've been trying to navigate through all this futuristic, concocted, crazy technology. So let's take a look at what I originally was talking about, which is a signal to noise ratio. Now, one of the things that I mentioned, oh, get me out of the way, is ambiguity. And it sounds easy and sort of elementary at the initial stage, but ambiguity shows up all the time. I cringe as somebody who is interested in communication, modes of communication and research. A lot of times people say something and you're not able to tell what they mean. This can be an artifact of language. English, all languages actually have things called contronyms. They're also called Janus words. Janus was the two-faced god. Then in ancient Rome, you'd have a face on a door. It's kind of creepy, actually. You'd have a face when you opened a door to go into somebody's house. They'd have a face, and then you'd have a face on the other side of the door. So hello and goodbye. So we get the name for January because it's facing forward and facing back. I don't know what that means. But anyway, we have words that mean two different things. So for example, when you talk about sanctions, sanction is a word that means to withdraw permission, such as imposing sanctions on a country. If we're not friends with Iran, we impose sanctions, which means to withdraw permission. It also means to give permission. I sanction this act. You can see how fraught the English language is with different kinds of ambiguities. I think of some other ones. Cleave means to separate, also means to put together. Bound. Bound means you're bound for some destination, but it also means you're tied up. Sorry, I keep shaking the desk here. I'm not used to doing this at home, and I'm used to doing it in front of a quick complaining. Okay, garnish is one that I always think about. When you go into a restaurant, a garnish is a little something extra they give you. My wife owns a legal company that garnishes people's wages, and that means to take away. So oversight committee. An oversight committee goes in to look at something to make sure that everything's being done correctly, and oversight also means something that you left out. So those are all examples. There are also some contronymic phrases that out of context, and this is where context becomes incredibly important, we wouldn't understand. One of my favorite examples of this is a case in the 50s. It was a British law case that was sort of notorious. And there were two young men. One was named Craig and one was named Bentley, if my memory is remembering it correctly. Anyway, Bentley was the older one. He was about 18. And Craig was younger, I think 15 or 16. And Craig, they were trying to steal things out of a warehouse. And Craig was up on the roof of the warehouse, and he had a gun. And the police were called, and they wound up getting Bentley. And one of the policemen was climbing up the roof to try to get the younger man. And Bentley yelled, "Let him have it." Craig consequently turned around to the policeman and shot him and killed him. Now, the subsequent hearing had an interesting dilemma insofar that the prosecution was arguing that "let him have it" meant kill him. So that would make Bentley, who's old enough to be hanged, they still hung people in the 50s in England, whereas the defense argued "let him have it" meant give him the gun. And they wound up going with the prosecution, and the young man who said "let him have it" was hanged. So that's a really important example of ambiguity that can be sort of tragic. Context. We're going to talk about gestures too. An interesting thing about gestures, I teach a class called semiotics, which looks at signs, the difference between icons and indices, and icons, indices, and symbols. I knew I'd remember that. We use gestures all the time. Let me give you an example of context. Okay. This is my thumb. I'm raising it, which if this were an emoji, it would mean looking good, right? In the context of an emoji, or even if, hey, you guys are doing a great job. If we're scuba diving, this means I'm in trouble. I need to go up. So I'm not okay. So it could mean okay, it could mean not okay, or I'm doing it like this, and I need a ride. So again, context becomes paramount when you're looking at modes of communication. That's another one. Errors, we'll talk a little bit about those. Punctuation, it can make all the difference in the world, and I'll show you a little bit later. I'll show you an example of that. Gendered communication, we are beginning to understand the complexity of gender and gendered language. The language is changing to reflect the realities of the complexities of gender, but also intergender communication. Even so, for instance, if I'm driving on a long road trip and my wife is riding shotgun, and she looks over and says, she sees some lights for the city, and she goes, "Are you hungry? Do you want to stop?" And I say, "Nope, I'm good," and we keep driving. Later on, she seems grumpy, and I can't figure out why. When she says, "Are you hungry?" that has several meanings. And the implicit meaning is maybe she's hungry, and I might want to ask her, "Well, no, dear, I'm not hungry, but are you hungry? Do you want to stop?" This type of thing. These kinds of things are covered in the works of by Deborah Tannen, who's a sociolinguist, and she talks about how men and women, not overall, but in some sort of classical cases, intergender communication. It's in a book, if you're interested, it's called "You Just Don't Understand Men and Women in Conversation." Pardon me while I move this desk so I stop hitting it. I'll just stop touching it. Customs. If you've traveled anywhere, learning the local customs. Doesn't even have to be into a different country. Half my family's from the South and the other half's from Italy. So it's, yeah, there are different customs. Language, we talked about that. Knowledge, jargon. If you're not familiar with the jargon of a particular field, and a lot of you are studying in fields like engineering and science, if you're computer science, for example, you're familiar with the jargon, and it is jargon, virus. But if you're a biology major, virus means something else. So it's a stipulative definition that is going to be interpreted very differently. So that's, you're going to handle them differently too. So knowing the difference between virus and virus, the complexity of something, if you engage in a reductionist explanation of something, sometimes you can lose a lot of information. So if somebody says, "What is photosynthesis?" and you say it's plants eating light. Well, That probably works at a sort of elementary level, and it might even work for the kids. But at a certain point, that's kind of true, but kind of leaves a lot of things out. And some of the examples. Oh, confirmation bias is another good one. Um, it's not a good thing. It's just a good example. Confirmation bias can happen when you have a particular belief system, whether it's religious or political, your political party, or whatever, something that you have a group of people that share a belief system, and you tend to go to news sites that support that view, so it reinforces your concept of the truth, or you hang out with people who believe the same things that you believe. That's what human beings tend to do. It's sort of an evolutionary mistake. If it is evolutionary, maybe it's culturally learned. The problem with that is you're going to have a skewed view of reality that's going to be based on, I'm making sure that all the information that I get is the information that agrees with what I already believe. So one of the papers you're going to be writing for this class is an argument paper. Well, you'll be wanting to access information that challenges your preconceptions of reality. It's the devil's advocate in the church. They used to have something called the devil's advocate who would argue against orthodox scripture and not get burned at the stake. And that's a good thing to have. In fact, if you have a friend who believes things are very different, it can be frustrating, but at the same time, it informs you as to what the other is, where the other is coming from. If you've done debate or forensics, you have to do the same thing. You have to study both sides. You don't know once you come to the debate whether you're going to be doing affirmative or negative. So anyway, that's probably good as far as, see if I can actually use it. Oh, look at that. Oh, too far. Come on, come back. There we go. Analytical tools. Let's see what's in here. Okay. I think I mentioned the Aristotelian appeals. The Aristotelian appeals are named after Aristotle, who talked a lot about rhetoric and rhetorical analysis and rhetorical strategies and how you can convince people of something. When your rhetoric used to mean persuasive speaking, and that's because writing was a fairly late invention. Oral traditions were in place long before writing came along, and we'll even talk a little bit about that, writing as a technology. There are three we'll be looking at. Pathos. Pathos is an appeal to emotion. We get the words pathetic, which usually means pity, but it can also just mean full of pathos, full of emotion in one way or another. Or apathy. Apathy means you don't care, you're apathetic. Logos, good Greek word that means word, oddly enough, but it also means logic. We get the word logic from logos. So somebody's word use, the logic of their argument, this type of thing, appeal to logic. Ethos. If you look up the word ethos in the dictionary, you're not going to see the Aristotelian stipulative definition. You're going to see something that is more along the lines of a way of behaving and believing in a group. Could be a corporation, could be a church, could be a political party, a means of operating in a belief system, like a mission statement. But the Aristotelian definition of ethos means credibility. We get the word ethics from that. So your credibility, for example, and all three of these can interact with each other. If I violate the laws of logos, of logic, if I engage in a logical fallacy, which we'll also be talking about, I can damage my credibility or my ethos. My misuse of logos can damage my ethos. Or if I'm using pathos of no logos, that could damage my ethos as well. Yeah, let's look at some examples. Okay. So examples of types of pathos would be patriotism. I remember when 9/11 happened, I was driving through Corvallis, and the Dairy Queen had the little marquees they have with whatever flavor of Blizzard they have there, and it said, "God bless America." And then it said half off blizzards. So we were really pulling together as a nation. So patriotism is an emotion, appeal to patriotism, red, white, and blue, what have you. Sex, big one, can sell gum, cars, everything pretty much with sex. For some reason, that's a really powerful one. Ego, you're the kind of person who deserves this product. You are to have discriminating tastes, look at you, it's kind of like a horoscope to tell you all the good things about you. You'll notice that outrage and fear are spilling over into logos. And the reason I did that, and I should have done it with more of them, but anyway, it's going to get the idea that sometimes fear is a logical response to something. It's not just, if you say appeal to pathos, it can be fear-mongering, so they can be trying to manipulate you into voting a certain way or believing something. If you want to go to war, they'll say we have to be afraid. But sometimes fear is it's legitimate. It makes sense. So sometimes it's logical. So as you can see, just like with the pathos, logos, and ethos, and some of the other things we'll be looking at, these can spill over into each other. Logos, statistics, evidence. I put testimony, by the way, over a little bit into a pathos, because if you committed a murder and your mother takes the stand and says, my child is a very nice child, look at that face. This is not a face, it's somebody who could do something. That's the appeal to pathos more than anything. But if it's expert testimony, ballistics, the preponderance of striations on the casing of the bullet show that it came from this gun, Okay, so that's logos. Ethos, expertise, experience, education. If you have a degree in something, a higher degree particularly, supposedly, that's really true. If you have a PhD in something, or a master's or whatever, you have more credibility. Or if you've been at a job longer. I've been teaching for over 25 years. I could say that means I'm good at teaching, but there are a lot of bad teachers out there who've been teaching for longer than I have. Again, let's look at some examples. Hopefully this is helping. I don't like this mode because I don't get any feedback, but hopefully I won't have to use this video. But if I do, it's a backup. Okay. Pathos. God bless America. I put that one in there. TV ads, a lot of times, advertisers will appeal to pathos because unfortunately of the three, it's the one that seems to work the best. Love. It's what makes a Subaru a Subaru. No. If you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. So you should be mad about the situation that's going on. Hooters. I don't have a picture for this one. The All-American Thick Burger at Carl's Jr. The billboard showed they came out with a hamburger. It's an American flag in the back, Carl's Jr. logo, and it was a hamburger patty with 2 hot dogs and then potato chips. And there was an entire 4th of July picnic crammed between 2 buns. And it was the All-American Thick Burger. I don't know what makes it All-American, but I guess that's what they're trying to sell it with. Here's a magazine cover from when I was growing up. It was a magazine called National Lampoon Humor Magazine, and they were making a play on how a lot of times people will use pathos, emotion, or things to sell something. And this one, it says, if you don't buy this magazine, we'll kill this dog. A little bit of trivia, the dog's actual name was Cheeseface. I don't know why. So that's using pathos. In this case, it's humor. It's making fun of a use of pathos. And if I can get this to way back. And there's a young lady with big hamburgers. Okay. Logos. Oh, this one is a mess. Taken as a whole, the range of published evidence indicates that the net damage costs of climate change are likely to be significant and to increase over time. I forgot to cite my sources. That's actually from NOAA. Anyway, it's basically just information that's been observing the effects of climate change. Earth's day, and this is from NASA, Earth's day and night cycle is explained by posting that the sun, moon, or spheres measuring 30, that movement circles 3,000. This is this is for the flat earthers. This has to do with why the Earth is spherical. But here's all the mathematical proofs for 2 + 2 = 4, and I couldn't even fit that on there. So, proof, logos. And finally, ethos. What did I put for ethos? Oh, here we go. Trust me, I'm a doctor. Um, there's a phrase for you. Depends on a doctor of what, though. I've been through it myself. Sometimes ethos or credibility comes from the fact that you've been through what a person's going through, so that you have more credibility to be able to deal with them. If you go to a doctor and you have a broken leg and you're being treated by a doctor who's never had a broken leg, and the doctor says, "Does it hurt when I do this?" You're thinking, yes, all physicians should have to have their bones broken so that they can empathize. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you the President of the United States. Again, supposedly doing with to deal with ethos or credibility. Why, yes, I've read the Bible in the original Hebrew, Aramaic, and Koine Greek. So again, the credibility would be, I know the original languages. I'm able to actually go through and not just look at it as a translation. And there, well, it was a picture of a famous guy. Okay, good. Something else that will become incredibly important. Again, I'm going to return to these. We're kind of going through them very quickly, but this is just an overview the first day. And I look forward to questions you have. If it doesn't work out and we can't do Zoom session today, I'm hoping you will reach out to me with questions, email. I'll set up sessions. I can get this technology working. Okay. Fourth word in Greek. It's not one of the Aristotelian appeals, but very important word, kyros. And there are two words in Greek for time. One is chronos, which means measure of time. A clock, a watch, all are chronometers. They measure time. So seconds, minutes, hours, etc. Kyros has a very specific meaning, and you've come across it, but probably didn't know it was called this. I'm going to have a little coffee. It's way too early. I got up way too early. Oh, but I was panicked about this technology. So Kyros is the window of opportunity of time and place, the context of time and place. And that probably the easiest way to talk about Kyros is to show you examples. So that's what. Okay, two kinds of Kyros. There's once in a lifetime Kyros, and then there are recurring examples of Kyros. A once in a lifetime, let me jump down here real quick. Job interview. Hopefully some of you have experienced, I'm touching the desk again. I've experienced the process of job hunting, or you will soon. And one of the things that happens is you apply for a job, you employ a rhetorical strategy, that is to say, you put together a cover letter and a resume, and you make yourself look great on paper. Hopefully they will call you in for an interview. Now that interview, let's say the interview is an hour. You have 1 hour at a specific time and place to prove to them that you are worthy of that particular position. Now, if, let's say, after the interview, you go home, you do all the follow-ups, you feel like you performed really well, you don't get the job for whatever reason. Someone was more qualified, whatever. You don't get a do-over. You can't, if they say, well, we want someone else, you don't get to say, I think I can do better. It doesn't work that way. So that would be a once in a lifetime Kyros. It could even be me pulling out into traffic, right? And I say, ooh, there's a car down there. I think I can get in there before that. So time and place, window of opportunity. Gavrilo Princip, I don't know if any of you have ever heard of him before. He's a great example of Kyros. I love this. Was a Serbian student who, along with other Serbian students, were trying to throw off the rule of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So in 1914, God, I hope I'm getting that right. I'm going to have to look that up. Anyway, he decided to, and I think it was in Sarajevo, assassinate the Archduke Ferdinand, who was coming in with his driver was going to take him to the streets, and everybody was going to cheer and this. But Gavrilo had a gun, and he waited for the Kyros, the proper time and place, to execute, literally, the proper rhetorical strategy, which the signal in this case would be a bullet. And he waited and waited and waited, and nothing happened. Turns out the driver, for other circumstances have to do with Kiros, chose a different route, got lost, and wound up going down a different street. So Gavrilo thought, well, I guess I missed my opportunity. Lo and behold, he makes a turn on the street, and here comes the driver. So he did get a do-over, I guess, in a way. Shot the Archduke Ferdinand and killed him. And that was called considered to be the first bullet or shot fired that started the First World War. Now, moving on, spoiler alert, the First World War didn't go well for the Germans, and the Treaty of Versailles put them into an economic and emotional depression. They were not doing well after World War I. So this fella from Austria comes down and says, well, you guys got screwed in that whole deal. And they said, yeah, you guys really need to figure out how to rebuild and do this. And they say, wow, this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. And he said, I'm pretty sure the way to solve this problem would be to kill the Jews. A lot of historians argue that had Hitler not come down sorry, it's hard, had not carpe diemed, is that right? That moment, his rhetorical strategy wouldn't have worked. So he struck when the iron was hot. Germany was already doing fairly poorly, and he was trying to tell them, I have a better idea. And so people were willing to listen. So that started World War II. It's a whole mess. Okay, then there are those recurring examples of Kiros where you employ a rhetorical strategy that is appropriate to a time and place that happens over and over again, but and holidays are a great example of that. I found a picture of me with Santa. There we go. Santa not looking real thrilled. I think he knew I was Jewish. Go away, Santa. There we go. Okay, that's just wrong. Classes. What we're doing here is time and place, although place has taken on a different concept because I'm in my windowless basement and you're all at home or somewhere. And so we're not meeting in a classroom anymore. Well, we had to change our rhetorical strategy for this particular Kiros due to the COVID-18 or whatever it is. A job. Now, the job interview is a once-in-a-lifetime Kiros, but once you have the job, you show up at a particular time and place. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Enough of that. Okay, that's Gavrilo Princip, by the way. He got arrested. Oh, I didn't mean to do that. Come back. Come back. All right. I don't think we'll go into the fallacies today. I don't think we have time, but I want to talk about rhetorical analysis, which is your first assignment. And one of the things you're going to be doing is on Canvas, I've put up the reading packet. You're going to be doing reading packet summaries. So there are, I think, 10 readings. I think I got it down to 10 finally, that you'll be doing. And what I'd like you to do is read them carefully, look up things that you don't recognize. So for example, if you're reading Letter from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King and he mentions names and you don't know who they are, look them up. Come prepared to discuss who these people were and why he would mention them. Now, the first paper is not an argument paper. The first paper is merely a rhetorical analysis, which is going to establish how effective this document was able to fulfill its purpose for its audience through the techniques. So you'll be looking at the efficacy of the document. That's a picture of Kenneth. He's not having a good day. All right. So again, purpose. What is it? Audience. Whom is it for? Whom is it designed for? Technique. How is it designed? So what, whom, how. Sounds pretty straightforward. It is, but as anything, once you start getting past the surface, it gets a little more complex. So if it's, and here's an interesting point, speaking of Kiros. and rhetorical strategies. If it's cereal, even where it's put on the shelf in the supermarket, if you go to Fred Meyer and go down the cereal aisle, you'll notice on the bottom shelf, there are all these very colorful, sugar-filled cereals being shilled by insane, clinically festive rabbits and leprechauns and just terrifying. And those are placed down at the bottom shelf because the primary audience, in this particular case, the demographic profile, would be little young people, about 6 years old and such, who are at that level. And they'll see those, and that's why the supermarket knows that's the best place to put them. And they'll say, you know, I want this. And now the interesting thing is, in that case, you have a bifurcated primary audience because you have the child who's screaming, mommy, 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 I want sugar-coated bombs or whatever the hell they are. I'm trying to remember when I was growing up. Quisp. I don't know if they have that anymore. They were little UFOs. Captain Crunch. They still have Captain Crunch. So, unfortunately, Mother has the purse string. Purse strings? The money. Let's just call it money. I hope I don't have to share this video, but hopefully I'll get it together. More coffee. Money. Mother has the money. And she then needs to decide whether or not to buy the cereal, and the kid needs to say, but, you know, I really want it. And so his rhetorical purpose is convincing. And it'll say something like 9 essential vitamins, or one of those meaningless phrases they stamp on boxes, like part of this complete breakfast. So I, on the other hand, as a person in his 50s, go for the top shelf items, which are, you know, just really disgusting fiber, more fiber than a wicker furniture set, way up on the top there. Kellogg's Forest Bottom, you know, it's just no flavor. It's just to scrape my colon out. Okay, TMI. So let's take a look at some of examples of these. Let's look at, okay. So persuasive, informative, instructive. Persuasive, and by the way, these mix up too, because if you're going to persuade somebody of something, whether it's to believe something, to act in a certain way, or to value something, you probably need some information too. So they're not always as neatly parsed out as that. No, come back. There we go. Still learning. All right, here we go. Persuasion. The purpose here is to convince the audience to buy something, believe something. And so there's 3 kinds of claims we'll be looking at. Claims of truth, claims of value, and claims of policy. If it's a claim of truth, it should be self-explanatory. This is true. If it's a claim of value, it's something that we should hold up and appreciate. And if it's a claim of policy, we should be doing it differently. So if the claim of truth is climate change is anthropogenic, it's caused by humans, the value, claim of value would be the earth is worth saving. We should probably put our priorities into saving the earth because it has value. We should switch from fossil fuels to cleaner and more renewable sources of energy. And that is a policy, a claim of policy. So examples right here. Oh my gosh. No. Go away. That's what's his name? Joel Osteen. He's a televangelist who has a huge mega church. God wants us to prosper financially, to have plenty of money to fulfill the destiny he has laid out for us. Sounds just like Jesus. Okay, and then what's this one? I've forgotten actually some of the stuff I put in the, this gentleman says the earth is flat. And he's holding a spherical object, ironically. So that would be a claim of truth. Let's get out of here. Okay. Instructive, pretty straightforward. There's a recipe, how to put together an IKEA shelf, a recipe for tikka masala, YouTube video explaining how to play the saxophone. The instructive purpose is essentially there to guide you through a process, and it expects some sort of action from the user. So if you're loading some kind of software, it'll say, click on icon, you'll see a window open up. Find this submenu. So it's user action, system reaction, back and forth. And the technique used will take into consideration if you're learning how to do something, avoiding things, for example, like jargon. If the person, I'll give you a perfect example, actually, I just thought of it. Years ago, I bought one of those pre-cut tool sheds made out of cedar. And I am not allowed around tools normally. And there's a good reason for that. I'm not good with anything. And so I was starting to put this thing together. And in the manual, it said, be sure to toenail the nails into the corners of the whatever. Where I come from, toenail is a noun, not a verb. So I had to call my friend who actually is good with tools. He's from Canada. They're good with tools up there. And I said, Lane, what is toenail? He said it means to hammer it in at an angle. But if this is designed for somebody like me, who knows virtually nothing, probably would want to say hammer the nails in at an angle. Anyway, things like that. We'll look at some examples of that. So in that case, it would be ineffective at one level. Informative, for your information only, don't need to do anything with it. So here's oh, it's too close for photosynthesis. Textbook explaining photosynthesis. It's purely informative. It can't be persuasive. They're not trying to persuade you that plants eat light. It's not instructive because you can't. You don't have which is too bad we don't have the little green things that make it possible. That would be awesome. You go to the tanning booth and have lunch at the same time. Hurricane Dorian, remember that one. Weather map. Information, not telling you what to do. Hey, what's that? That's weird. Yeah, the weather report. There's really nothing you can do about the weather, although Mark Twain said everybody talks about the weather, but nobody does anything about it. It's just information. And news. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets tricky. News, if you look at the newspaper has all three purposes in it. It has recipes, it has how to do something, it has opinion pieces, persuasive, and then it has news, which should fall under informative. But if you read Fox News and the Huffington Post and Al Jazeera and the BBC and the Guardian, anyway, so on and so on and so on, the news section isn't always purely informative. So how you frame it is going to. So beware. Carpe diem, not carpe diem. What is it? Caveat emptor. I don't know, some Latin thing. Good. So that's rhetorical analysis, and that's what you'll be doing. I want to do fallacies today. We talked a little bit about what can get in the way of the signal. When you're researching, one of the things I'd like you to do, particularly with the packet, I forget what the first reading is in the packet. I think it's, I don't have it with me, unfortunately, but regardless of what it is, whatever you're reading in the packet, do what one of the essays in there is called Claiming an Education by Adrienne Rich, wonderful woman who, wonderful poet and feminist writer, who was telling a graduating class of female students, a female college, don't be passive about your education. Access it, be proactive. Don't receive an education. And she talks about how we always talk about, I received an education at Oregon State University. Don't be passive about it. So contact me if you have any questions. I will be available to you if I'm not sleeping or teaching. I will try to make myself available. This is hard stuff, and a lot of you, I've heard students say, I hate writing. Well, that means you hate communicating. It's actually one of those things that the more you hone it, the better it's going to help you with whatever you're doing. We're all going to have to communicate one way or another. Writing can be difficult, I know, but at the same time, it's going to be something that you'll appreciate later in life and say, well, maybe even now, and say, I want to be able to get my purpose across for the particular audience I'm looking at, and I want to use the techniques that make the most sense. So please don't hesitate to claim your education. Oh, I'm looking at me. I'm not even looking at you. I should be looking at the camera. I just realized the whole time I'm looking at myself. How narcissistic. I'll get this down, by the way. This is still new to me. I'm not good with things like this. Here's what I'm good at. I brought this just for comfort. I'm not even using it. This is what I do. So, there we go. Purpose, audience, technique. Remember those. I'm going to spell technique. There we go. You see that? That's pathetic. But in all seriousness, let me know if anything is unclear, if you're unable to download anything, if you have any questions. And I think that's as long as I'm going to make this video, because hopefully I won't have to use it. God, this was a mess. That's not, yeah, it'll work, right? Well, we're all kind of getting used to this new world. Okay. Well, I will hopefully see you sometime this afternoon or this morning, and you won't have to sit here and listen to me, and you'll actually be able to ask questions. But if not, I have this as a backup, and I think I'll just say goodbye here, except I don't know how to stop. Hang on. Oh, here we go. Is that it? Can I leave the meeting? Oh my God! Stop share, and oh, here we go. End meeting. Bye. Yes, end meeting for all. It's just